Ja, ich grüße euch ganz herzlich im Namen von Voices of Faith. Seit dem 25. November
welcome you all. Since November the 25th, Voices of Faith has been the platform for conversations on gender-based violence against women in the Roman Catholic Church. Topics such as violence, abuse, racism, sexism, discrimination, and the collision of two fundamental rights of religious freedom and the prohibition of discrimination. Today we end this cycle of conversations on human rights and their implementation in the Roman Catholic Church. I think many of us here feel the same way. The lack of implementation of human rights within the Church, even more than 50 years after Vatican II, leads to a sense of unease and pressure that we can no longer simply suppress. I warmly welcome our distinguished women's panel and thank Christiane Florin for taking over the moderation of the session. So without much ado, because it's a speaker we do that herself, will introduce herself. So thank you. I'm happy very much for having been able to plan for this panel. And let me thank the interpreters straight away for the great job. And we've been talking about miracles, and one miracle is that the Catholic Church has invented human rights. You might remember what Pope Benedict XVI said before the German government a few years ago. On that occasion, he was so proud for having invented something of that importance for the whole world. The fundamental right of people is the right to worship each one their own God. And if you remember, Pope John the 23rd also talking about the charters of human rights, the Convention on Human Rights, stated that the Holy See had undersigned this convention. One interesting aspect while preparing this debate was something that Pope Francis said on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Convention of Human Rights. It was back in 2018. And I wish to quote because there are very interesting aspects here. Pope Francis said, we need to become aware that in the past, especially after the social problems we endured in the 60s, the violation of the implementation of some rights were modified and new rights were established that seem to be in contradiction among themselves. And not always there are relationships of friendship among different nations and countries because the perception different human rights was different according to the different countries. So there may be a paradox that in the name of human rights, new ideological form of colonization may stem in the detriment of the poorest countries. So he speaks of what he calls the new human rights. For example, here, what he mentioned is equal rights for everyone, the right. This seems to be an invention dating back to 1986. And based on my own research, I suspect that the women were invented also in 1986 in terms of their rights. There's a difference, you know. And this is the theme we're going to tackle this afternoon. And The panel is a very interesting one. I'd like to invite the different speakers. Mayra Klein, she's co-editor of the book Catholics and Queer People. She studied the Catholic religion. Welcome, Mayra Klein. What do you think? What is, in your opinion, the greatest violation of human rights?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I believe that the greatest problem is the prioritization and the need of creating it as a priority of the human rights. And I would like to say that one of the most important points in understanding why human rights are not working in the Catholic Church is the very concept of dignity. And when all of a sudden women ask for equal rights, then a problem arises because human rights doesn't equal rights for women. And so the picture of women in the church, and this is something that we will talk about even later, I believe is something that needs to be addressed. And I am deeply committed for women in the Catholic Church. And for me, it is a pivotal point also for queer people who have not a well-defined gender and are discriminated inside the Catholic Church. And so they actually live a very complex life, and it is not always possible to make their voice be heard. And so it's also interesting to talk about the right to God and to the sacraments, which are not accessible to everyone. And there are many sacraments which are not accessible to all. For example, baptism. If it doesn't occur when we are newborn babies, it's very hard to be baptized later on. Then there's also the exclusion from the Eucharist when, for example, a gay person wants it. And most surely we have also priesthood, which is not accessible to many people. And so it's easy to see and understand who can become a priest and who not. But is it necessary to have a personal perception? Well, no. I believe that when we seriously try to think that everyone is equal to one another and that they all have equal rights, the most important thing is not being violated in this context. And then it doesn't matter if I am directly interested or not.
Vor allem Betroffene, diejenigen, die ausgegrenzt sind, sich engagieren dafür und sagen, so da ist die
What happens is actually that many people actually commit themselves directly because they see a violation occurring. And what is the solidarity you feel? Well, I feel a lot of solidarity. However, it is just people contacting me who feel solidar with me, because feeling solidarity doesn't mean necessarily to understand what we are dealing with. Times we are lacking knowledge and we actually depend on the knowledge of others.
Lehrstuhlinhaberin Johanna Rahner.
So our next speaker in our panel, Johanna, who is a teacher specialized in dogmatism and working in University of Tübingen. And she's also an author of many interesting books. Professor Anna, dogmatic professor, the book concerning faith, very generally speaking. Where can you see the violation of human rights?
Eine Religion, die Menschwerdung Gottes sozusagen in den
Well, if we consider what we believe in, there is no contradiction. We can say that God is really at the core of our faith, so nothing is really strange of human there is. In the end, as far as theology is concerned, faith should be there for, the dignity of the human person. The church should commit herself to the dignity of people. So it is about, the situation that we see. So it is fundamental in the Catholic Church, as far as human rights are concerned, that, there are people out there who haven't understood yet that if one is in favor of human rights, must be in favor of human rights within and on the outside. I'm thinking about in the Synod of the Bishops in the 70s, where they say that justice must be proclaimed in the outside as well as inside of each one of us in order to be credible, and that applies to the condition of women. So it will be important to create a sort of a think tank, a task force to reflect and implement on these rights. It is not just about the profession of faith, it has to do with the institutions. But as far as the institutions are concerned, I think that as far as discrimination against women, we've discovered it 50 years ago already. So it is important that there is consistency between what is proclaimed inside and outside. But all this is tolerated, why do we stand this discrimination that is so clear? Well, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure what to say, because there are people who have left the church, and if the church doesn't suffer from that as an institution, the church is fine with that. But the church should suffer for, due to people leaving the church, because the church has a message that is universal, is to all mankind, and that is part of being Catholic, this universal aspect. Or maybe it's a sort of a surrogate concept of Catholicism. So in that case, the mission itself has been betrayed. So can we go ahead like that? Well, I think there is some microphone open. Okay, thank you. Well, but if you wish to say something, just go ahead, okay? I would like to welcome Sister Francisca Mitterer, who's now working on formation on human rights. She's a religious, she's a sister of the Holy Cross, and I read that she speaks of Saint Francis of Assisi in her book to create a new brotherhood and sisterhood. The first question: why don't you see this brotherhood and sisterhood within the church yet?
Seite her antworten. Dieses Thema hat mich so beschäftigt, dass ich dazu eine Promotionsarbeit verfasst habe.
Well,
zum Thema Ordensgehorsam im Kontext
let's put it in other words. I actually extensively dealt with this topic, and I deeply analyzed the question of human rights. But I would like to come back to the first question. And my approach derives from canon law, and I actually just agree with the first speaker. The canon law of 1983, Canon 772 actually says that the church needs to commit itself for human rights. And it is a law. It is actually a law, and we must abide by it. We must implement it, and we must pronounce and invoke human rights and consequently take action. This is part of justice. And Pope Francis said many times in a very explicit way, highlighting the fact that women and men are equal. When you read the commas 121 and 122 in the canon law, you can understand it. And I wonder why in the Catholic Church equal rights are not preserved. This is something that actually involves my question. And also the canon number 230, it was modified in the text Spiritus Domini, and I would like also to quote the fact that men being able to can actually request for the service of lecturers, but we're talking about laymen and not priests. And only this year, this specific passage of the canon law was modified, eliminating the term male, which was actually part of the initial text. And we can only be frightened or surprised in the face of this sentence we can read today in the 21st century. The magistry actually contradicts itself. There are concepts, there are norms to be respected, but at the very same time, there are also contradictory sentences. Yes, but the magistry also says that women have a specific character, which from a secular point of view can be considered as an injustice linking to an inequality in treatment, because they have the same value, but they are not equal. They're not the same. And so there is an unequal treatment. Shouldn't we change the magistry? Well, no, we should change canon law, because human rights actually describe social relationships between rights bearers and someone who takes action through, for example, baptism, and that is the church. And when in the church I would like to implement human rights, I need laws to do it, because rights can be requested only when the very content of the law can be implemented when the addressee is concerned. And so if I am not able to request rights, descriptions are not useful. And so human rights in the Catholic, in the canon law. Okay, perfect. And so I would like also to introduce to you Tina Stein, who is a teacher as well. We have many teachers with us today. She is a teacher of political theory and history of ideas in the University of Göttingen. And she also participates in the Synodal Way. Mrs. Stein, as a political scholar, do women have less rights compared to citizens?
Sind und in demokratischen Verfassungsstaaten sich auch
As to Catholic women, if they live in a democratic state, of course, have civil rights and human rights to enjoy. That is their characteristic. As Catholic women, they also have Christian rights. And this is very interesting that these rights are used in debates as an argument to limit the claiming of human rights within the Catholic Church. And this is really absurd if we think about the biblical message. You know, equal dignity, equal opportunity. We're all called to be free within our communities. The message of salvation, that is for everyone. So we need to bring the rights within the church at the level of the rights mentioned in the Bible, because, you know, a Catholic man or woman is not necessarily within the church, because that is a free decision. Well, as to the free choice, well, that also means that we as Christians, as Christian women, need to expose this contradiction, because there are many fora, many debates, and not only in Germany, but in Germany we are currently debating on that. That shows that there is a weakness here. We do not intend ourselves as free beings with equal dignity. And so we need to claim that equality within our church as well. Now, I would like to welcome Katharina Ganz, the Superior General of the Franciscan Sisters. She too is participating in the synodal journey, and she has written a very interesting book, Women Annoy. What does that mean, that women annoy others?
Doch, ich habe jetzt nur, Entschuldigung, ich muss
Is
mich
it my turn? Oh, I'm so sorry. I had some problems with my internet connection, my Wi-Fi, which is really terrible. And so I moved to another room. And so I'm very sorry if I lost some sentences. I beg your pardon. So the question concerned my book, right? It's not women who create problems, but rather church. Well, the church actually creates problems because women are not authorized to follow their vocation, for example. There are women who feel their vocation of being deacons or even religious leaders only for the mere fact of being women, and this is a discrimination compared to men. And maybe we will also talk about the theological approach. Well, naturally, this is a discrimination. This is natural, but this is not so natural to talk about discriminations, because we were just saying that we are in front of an unequal treatment, which is not justified. Yes, you're right, because the anthropology of gender is actually part of the church, and so women have the same dignity as men, but nevertheless don't enjoy the same rights. And so people continue thinking that this is the valid argumentation for the gender ideology, basing on the idea that there are only two complementary genders, accompanied by some specific roles that, from an anthropological point of view, have been so strongly defined that women, also talking and as quoting Simone de Beauvoir, they are just the other gender and they are able to feel the same vocation as men, generally speaking. Well, now you all actually pointed out the fact that this shouldn't be the situation, that the Bible, the scriptures, all texts say that all men are created equal and with the same dignity. But as a matter of fact, this is not the case, and the institution discriminates and has been discriminating for 2000 years against women and against those who are not men or male beings. And so what could we do? How could we change this so rooted situation? Who wants to answer?
Ich probiere es mal. Ich weiß nicht, ob es mich
Let me try.
optimistisch stimmt, aber die Tatsache, dass der Druck
I don't
stärker
know whether I'm too optimistic, but the fact that the pressure from the outside is stronger and stronger as far as credibility is concerned, and gender equality. Well, there's a crisis within the Catholic Church, a scandal that refers to these topics, the institutional aspect also that favors sexual abuse. We need to name things, you see, and even all people need to understand that we cannot go ahead like this, that the future of the Catholic Church
diese Tendenzen einfach ignoriert.
depends on this, because the understanding is that we base ourselves on the scriptures, and or maybe we can take another orientation and introduce these rights in the Catholic Church instead of transforming it into a cult, into a sect. So I think that on this matter, the future of the Catholic Church will depend in the upcoming 10 years. Does anybody else have another opinion?
Ein zweistündiges Gespräch
I
als
would like to
Mitglieder.
say that what makes me optimistic when I think about the future is that I recently had a 2 hours conversation during the Women Forum with 20 bishops, and it never happened before that we had a possibility of talking about women in such a context and talking about the questions of the synodal way. And I really perceived a strong seriousness in the approach, even on Friday night when the question of women was presented, and the fact that some congregations and a publishing house presented some specific events, only debating about theology with them, and considering the whole cultural situation in Germany, actually makes me feel brave and hopeful. We hope that starting from the synodal way in Germany, we will have the possibility of achieving world results. And I believe that it is not in vain that we commit ourselves, same as in the Second Vatican Council people did. It wouldn't have been possible to bring about such a change without some specific places and moments in which what had been decided could also be lived. And so we can be optimistic for the German church. As for the world church, I would like to not lose hope. I would like also to work in network. The fact that 100 people can meet, speaking different languages, same as we are doing now, even with very few problems of communication, is crucial, and this awareness is great. Voices of Faith, Mary 2.0, and other initiatives are all part of something that can be perceived also by the Church.
Ich hätte jetzt direkt die Nachfrage, kommt das in Rom an? Denn die Signale aus Rom sind ja doch etwas andere, ne? Also da habe ich jetzt noch keine Botschaft gehört. So nach
Well, the signals are there. I haven't heard of any signs saying, okay, now let's reflect on this issue. Let's see if there are more than to genders. I'm thinking about gender equality, but I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry for interrupting you. Now, Sister Francisca Mitterer had asked for the floor. Well, I think that this is a whole process. I joined the church. I learned to love the church because that was a place where I could live my spirituality as a child, as a young woman in my own context. And then seeing what happened within the church, you're confronted with all that happens within the church. But what makes me, feeling optimistic is with our Archbishop in Munich. He also stresses the fact that one side of the church is a community, an organization which works thanks to the Holy Spirit, guided by the Holy Spirit. But the church is an organization that must keep on learning, also based on historical changes. I'm thinking about the structure that Jesus gave to the early church. We must not lose it. And then there are these barriers, these blocks. I don't know which ecclesiology is behind that, but the way I see the church, I think this is possible. As to Karl Marx, well, that is a good keyword. In Der Spiegel, I read about sexual abuse, the very serious violation of human dignity. And the bishops in Der Spiegel, the Bishop Marx and the president of the German Bishops' Conference, I'm not sure they really deal with this topic. Either they do not react, or maybe they didn't just get involved. So why there's hope with the synodal journey, with the bishops? Do you really have an idea on how to lobby really on the church in this matter?
Ist für eine Transformation.
Well, I first of all would like to advertise the fact that the synodal way can be an opportunity for change, because from inside we cannot launch any peaceful revolution in which we are going to create a new institution. On the contrary, we need to create a transformation inside the institution. And for this reason, we need, and even if this is a paradox, we need the bishops. And even those bishops who contributed to the creation of this institution, being guilty and nevertheless protecting other bishops. And I believe that we can convince bishops, and we can actually make them participate in our conversation. We talked about power division, talking with the voice of angels. We describe the importance of power division, and this is something that even bishops say because they feel too heavy a burden on their shoulders. And so in those cases, we could really share the procedures and responsibilities for power division, even to avoid power abuse, because human rights are fundamental to protect freedom, and for that we need procedures. And I believe that this awareness has been growing in our community. It can be that this minority actually still blocks, based on the statute of the synodal way, since they actually ask for a minimum percentage. But nevertheless, with all the requests that were submitted, we need to wonder,
in einer politischen
what
Weise
if with our great arguments, what if we also gave a political nuance to this question? If we were able also with strikes, with Mary 2.0, with a lower commitment, we as Catholic women, we could also
bürgerlichen Rechte
think about working in network all together in the field of civil rights in order to formulate a request to the state or to make a proposal asking the state, which gives privileges to the church,
sondern dass das auch an Bedingungen knüpfen kann.
to
Bisher
not
historisch
necessarily give them as it is doing now, but it could also define some specific conditions. These conditions were created over time. But why should a state support an organization with prejudices, with, for example, church taxes or specific services in the collaboration between the state and the church? Why should we proceed in this way? We also saw it in the scandal of sexual abuse. You were probably the first one during the meeting, the first meeting of the Synodal Way, who asked the bishops, why was the Synodal Way created, and why shouldn't we ignore our reality? Why were you the only one who admitted it, talking about this topic?
Aber vielleicht die Person, die konkret
Well, that is a rather difficult question to answer. I think, you were the person who said the most radical things, what Ms. Stein said. It is an association of abusers, of aggressors. So in this context, we can express our ideas in a very strong way. There are people who are touched by these statements. There's a problem that has to do with the human rights, this false tolerance, this sort of culture of benevolence. We are all here talking peer to peer, and we come from a context where we know that there is a huge abuse of power, and we also know who was the abuser, but we are benevolent, the one towards the other. It is as if mistrust is something out of place, right? I'm thinking about those in roles of power, and I think that is the problem. They say, well, the problem is that there is no problem. Why are we even talking about this? Is there any problem? And some also said the time has come to stop talking and do something concretely. So who should act now? I think that there are different stakeholders. For example, before this meeting, we asked whether the victims of these abuses should do more, but maybe they're frightened, they're scared, and they don't want to be exposed. But if somebody is representing a church where there is abuse of power, well, that is something that these people must acknowledge and denounce, and also change the relevant structures. As to the synodal process, I think that, the synodal process speaks precisely of that. Once we have these documents telling us what to do, well, the bishops should refuse to accept what is written in those texts, in those documents. It cannot be just an option, the option not to draw the right conclusion on behalf of those who represent this church at the highest levels.
Sind solche Stichworten jetzt. Vielleicht ein bisschen ein historisches Gedächtnis. 2010, als der ganze Missbrauchsskandal zum ersten Mal
Well, thinking about the year 2010, when the scandal of abuse broke in the public opinion, some proposals were advanced that the Catholic Committee made to the political world in order to change the existing law, in order to give the possibility to the church for creating new alternatives. And this is also crucial. And I'm really happy to see that there are people who are part of the synodal way, but in an uncomfortable way, in a complex way. People who don't say, well, this cannot be done, or it is forbidden to do something like that for a person working in the synodal way. The way of working and presenting himself or herself in the church, or also thinking about the teaching of the church, saying that this is what should be done and all the rest is just a lie, can really represent a change. And even another jurist in Germany directly asked, if the Catholic Church today, and together with other organizations from the Muslim communities, asked for a state acknowledgement, they would never succeed, because there are some criteria to be met if a religious organization want to be recognized. And the church has this right out of historical reasons. And so it will also be a moment for the institutions to review the law, the existing laws from a critical point of view, and with specific time frames. It could also be done, because it is not forbidden, not from the Grundgesetz in Germany, it was not even forbidden in the Republic of Weimar. And so we could also work on it. And I see that even Mrs. Stan had done something like that. And so I believe that there are many fields on which we should work. Another important question is that the Central Committee, which has many bishops, if 2/3 of the German bishops can block a question, then we need to take action, because we cannot allow this block to happen. Yes, actually, we have been talking about it. The church was never sanctioned over its history, even 2 years or almost 12 years after 2010. So who should actually take action? For example, by proposing the removal of some privileges.
Der Körperschaftsstatus angesprochen, aber es ist
the legislator in this new contract, the regulating body is not detailed. It only speaks of a review of the constitutional aspect of religion, the labor rights, being faithful and loyal. So it is not just about the European Court of Justice that has to double check whether human rights are respected or not. From the historical point of view, we should focus on history to see where this situation comes from. It is also positive that the state cannot interfere freely in the freedom of cult and the freedom of worship. So we can join religious communities. The state cannot tell us how to live our faith. So this is also a very important right that we have as individuals, and as communities. The church as this doctrine is very much discussed. There is a schism between the magisterium and the faithful, how the faithful live their faith, the revelation. The stance of the magisterium has these privileges granted by the state. So this magisterium is upheld, and the state cannot do this, to exert such an influence on the lives of people. From a political and scientific point of view, the state has an indirect influence on the citizens, and what could be the interest of the state. And from the perspective of the state, I would say that somehow it could have an interest vis-a-vis credible religious communities as to, for example, Caritas, Diaconia. They live in the social sphere. They participate in communicating certain values and transmitting them. So they collaborate and play, therefore, an important role. And the Catholic Church cannot do that in a credible way anymore. So there is a sort of contradiction, as others have already said. There are real rights that the church does not support or promote. Another question for our religious women here: what do you think? Can the state do something to improve the situation in terms of gender equality anchored and enshrined in the Constitution?
Haben das in der ganzen Missbrauchsgeschichte gesehen.
Well, I think so. We witnessed the presentation of all the reports on the abuse, and the very fact that these problems emerged and that the church made itself available to change canon law is already a signal, and we need the state to put some pressure on the church. And naturally, religious freedom is a human right, and it is a very deep right, but these rights are the very basis of individual rights. And so we can't say that the collective law of the church can become a space for not defined human rights. And so I believe that we need some pressure from the institutions to process and to promote a change, because otherwise the complacent position of the church is too high to be changed. And
bei den Loyalitätsobliegenheiten des Kirchenrechts.
I believe that even the pressure from the state could also help in the question of canon law as for human rights. And this is the reason why people need to be treated in an equal way, and we are the ones who need to provide for a solution, because if someone has the right to be here, he or she needs to be protected. Our collaborators know that we will not fire anyone without a just reason, but this depends much on ourselves and on our stance in the canon law. nothing would actually happen to us. But if we talk about the abolition of the status of nation of the church, this could actually affect our situation, for example, in Bayer, because we have this status of a congregation welcoming only women. And so what would it mean for communities of women if we think that everyone has the same rights? I think that we haven't still developed the very question. And if we, for example, discuss about the question of the veil, and I don't know what is the current situation from a legal point of view, but maybe women should not wear the veil. But again, I think that we all enjoy some privileges, and it wouldn't be any problem for me to feel solidarity. You can see that I don't wear any veil. But would you also welcome men? Well, I wouldn't have any problem to change our community, even to consider how other religious societies are doing it. There are some specific forms of community which have been doing it. We are not used to it, but we still need to discuss about it.
Die Angestellten sind sich in dem Fall sicher, dass sie
I think that something really important was just said. The people who work are not fired. They have safeguards. But again, that depends on the benevolence of the employer. So with discrimination and marginalization within the Catholic Church, a relationship of dependency is created. So that, people become even more vulnerable to abuses of power. So I think that we have these discriminatory structures, that those who have the power, according to the constitutions of the church, is a very limited group of people who are very powerful. So the state can play a role here because there are interests that the state has, that other stakeholders have, because there has been a sort of trauma, you see, as far as abuse of power is concerned. So these structures cannot be dissolved from within the church. We need to be aware of the fact that this abuse was actually favored by the structure itself. And of course, the state has similar problems because the state leaves the church, free to do as she pleases. So in Germany, the church has many bodies at the social level, many entities, and the church is basically free. But I don't think that is right, because we are talking about the well-being of people. So I think it is impossible that the state does not intervene. The church wants people to be good. The good of people is the priority, should be the priority of the church. So discrimination and marginalization are something that occurs physically and mentally also. So we've seen this in Germany. So I think that here lies one of the greatest problems, when we forget that this is all about the people. And
Wie sieht es denn aus
well,
mit der
I wouldn't say that everything is decided freely within the church, because, if you were baptized, you didn't have the chance to decide for your baptism or not, right? But as far as such entities as Amnesty International, I don't think they consider the church as an entity that violates human rights, right? So not large institutions, maybe the states, but why is that? Has it always been like that? Will it always be like that? So the secular organizations don't they have an interest in the violation of human rights by the church anymore?
Wissenschaftliche Untersuchung, die sich das vornimmt. Ja? Also es gibt Untersuchungen.
Well, this is a very interesting question. I actually don't know any scientific research dealing with this question, but I know a book from a young scholar talking about the right of the requests of the church to the UN. And here we can see that there are not only problems concerning human rights in the social structure, but there are also several problems in the policy of human rights of the Holy See to the United Nations. And everything considered, the Catholic Church actually presents itself as a political and positive actor in the international conflicts. And this is important to say. The role that we as political scholars recognize is put at risk, and it would be put at risk if an internal crisis occurred, because then the church would lose its credibility. But even in a smaller context, there are some positions that we need to consider with a skeptical point of view. Even the very dignity of women who are against a complete equality needs to be addressed. And if this question was proposed also to institutions and to the UN, it would be interesting. But I don't believe that Amnesty International never acted in this question. But yes, this could be also an interesting research. Well, maybe it could become also a strategy. Pope Francis recently said in Greece and in Cyprus that he actually supports migrants, and he is talking about the shame and the scandal of the migrants crisis. And maybe this is also a means so as to regain the support of believers to create a deal and saying, okay, I am dealing with human rights and migrants, but in my internal work, I make it possible not to talk about this question in my institution. We have many requests here.
Dann weiter. Ich glaube nicht, dass das wirklich eine absichtliche Strategie ist. Also das wäre.
I don't think that is a strategy of Pope Francis. We are overestimating, I think, what he's doing, what the church is doing. But the effect is that some NGOs may think I can't say really anything because, you know, we need NGOs, but I don't see it in terms of strategy. But the dramatic thing is that, you know, the internal contradiction cannot be seen. So this is not dangerous for man, but sometimes these theological principles contradict themselves. Well, I do agree 100% with what Ms. Rahaner said. You know, Pope Francis comes from Latin America, and with my work with the Congregation for Religious, for Consecrated Life, we asked them, why don't you work? They have not enough staff, because Pope Francis does not appoint people to work with us. So he does not realize what a structure needs to, you know, realize well-intentioned ideas. Well, you've been very benevolent too. You know, he comes from Argentina, he's the way he is. So, you know, there seems to be patience still out there, more than benevolence, maybe. Well, from a rational point of view, at least, that gives me peace of mind, you see. So I would say that with Fratelli Tutti, that is an encyclical letter that was understated, and that was also said at the presentation of the encyclical. Before we move to the questions from the audience as to the synodal process, what is the state of the art of the synodal process about human rights?
Mara Klein, please.
Well,
I can say, based on my experience in the Synodal Forum, for us it's always hard when we try to speak up in favor of human rights and for the rights of queer people. And so normally people start talking about human rights and they start asking, what rights are you talking about? Are you talking about sexual orientations? And these are not concepts that are part of human rights, or at least not in an explicit way. And so in the meantime, even legislators actually introduce the third gender, if I may say it in these words, but trying to propose in this argumentation is actually hard as far as I'm concerned, because other arguments are considered as stronger, and actually we try to pursue all rights in every context. But for example, the initiative concerning marriage for everyone was not approved. And at the same time, we want to ask for the benevolence of the church, but we can't also contemporarily foresee a benevolence without a marriage per se. And it is hard, as far as I'm concerned, and considering my experience, to have this general idea of finding a compromise and a union of the various visions of the human rights. And so the blessing from a second class doesn't mean equality, because actually everyone has the same possibility, right? What do the others say?
Diskutiert oder sagen, es muss auf drei
Well,
Ebenen.
we have discussed at three levels. We need to discuss at three levels. You know, from a theological point of view, there must be a new foundation. And from the biblical and theological point of view, that is possible. The humanistic sciences should be included in these reflections. Also, among the bishops, you know, this is a doctrine that is obsolete, if I may, and they cannot ask for obedience. You know, Rome just becomes more and more ridiculous. But the other level is dogmatic as far as access of women to ordination. And the arguments that were presented that have motivated or justified this, the secondary role of women cannot be tolerated any longer. And we've seen that also with the attitude of the church vis-a-vis slavery and death sentence. You know, it is possible for this to change. And the other level is the pastoral experience level, how queer people live and feel they are creatures of God, just just like anyone else, everyone else. And these voices must be heard, and it is happening already. You know, there are many conferences being held on this. We cannot just pretend that this issue does not exist. You see, the book by Sister Philip Barra, when it was presented, I must say that
zur Priesterin und plötzlich sind die ganzen
that there are, you know, there are women who feel called to be women priests, and there are also men who say we will be more than happy if the church dignified also these vocations. So at the pastoral level, you know, what people live at the personal level, well, the church we cannot do without, you know, sooner or later this will have to change.
Und wie viel,
but it takes courage, it takes diplomacy, you see, and dialogue, a struggle, really. Thank you.
Nicht so notwendig als vielmehr die Qualität der Argumentation.
Well, it's not fact of being charming or always smiling, but it's more a question of being concrete and having a very strong basis and background. I think that some changes occurred, that some steps have been made, and even if it's really late and some people were really frightened when they were put in front of their responsibilities, when even archbishops talked about organizations of criminal people. And I think that over many meetings that we held in the synodal way, that we will be able to activate something in the minds of people. And as far as I'm concerned, the feeling of trying to find a solution actually influences my relationship with bishops. And I believe that even the fact that women have a specific forum in the synodal way is actually a signal. And we were indicated to do that. We need the canon legislator in some specific questions that can be solved by bishops, whereas for other questions, the Pope needs to change the existing law. And so we are the ones who need to propose the right arguments and to be listened by bishops who also, on the other hand, need to listen to us. They have been working on recommendations for human rights. May I ask you, why is this majority of bishops on the one hand, and why on the other hand it is said that lay people are not on the same level as religious people? And I believe that one person corresponds to one vote, whereas the votes of bishops are considered more important. Well, I wasn't there personally, and I think that this was motivated by the fact that we needed to integrate the question in the canon law. And so if there is the specific quota that can modify, that can block, beg your pardon, that can block the changes, it is actually assigned for the synodal way, and it has a specific meaning also in the church. If something external to the canon law evolves, it will nevertheless involve the church. But can we say that all men are created equal, but bishops are more equal? We can also see that in the chat there are many questions. I don't know if Chantal had the opportunity of reading some questions. Maybe she is more updated than me.
Mara Klein, jetzt muss ich da den Chat schnell wieder reinschieben, in welchen Quellen steht geschrieben, dass queere Menschen nicht zu den Sakramenten?
There's a question to Mara Klein, who says, what are the sources that says that people are not admitted to the sacraments, queer people? Well, I don't know this theme that much, but there are people who know more than I do about this topic. There's a text of a forum that we're going to present on the occasion of the next synodal meeting. And you know, what they said in Rome as far as the blessings of same gender people getting married are concerned is that we must not create confusion as far as matrimony is concerned, but because you know, there is nothing else than a man marrying a woman, and so trans people, queer people are excluded.
Professorin Rana hat da sicherlich auch noch eine
Then depends also how they're registered with their names.
Wir haben explizit den Ausschluss von transsexuellen Menschen aus dem
Well, we've talked about this aspect. The magisterium of the church, you know, answers to questions that were never asked. So some aspects should be further clarified. You know, transgender people are excluded. There are different criteria. There is an ongoing discrimination against the homosexuals as far as the sacraments are concerned, because they say that it is an immoral lifestyle. So those people are excluded from the Eucharist, and it would be a scandal to grant them access to the Eucharist. And we see this in the practice of the church and in canon law.
Well, now I have a question for you. I also felt the same way when I heard that Pope Francis doesn't really realize about this contradiction, and so in a very intuitive way I also see it in the chat. I really can't believe that he doesn't realize about this contradiction. Maybe you could make some investigation. We can't accept it. And
die Folgen dieses Widerspruchs.
Well, I would like to say that the consequences are not considered as dramatic, and this is the dramatic way. He thinks that he can go ahead in the Catholic Church, same as many people think that they can bring about these contradictions without realizing how damaging it is for the institution. So we can talk about credibility, but we can also talk about the concept that a church which doesn't correspond to its image and the question of God, then a new discussion should be reactivated. And also the question of transgender people should be addressed in order to promote equal rights.
Aber nicht auch umgekehrt sehen, wenn die Kirche, die römisch-katholische Kirche.
Fine, but maybe we could also see it from a reverse point of view. in this specific situation of an identity political world, this could be also a favorable point from a marketing point of view, because modern states actually adapt to this approach. But we as a millennial institution can't adapt. There are many people that we have been talking about some minutes ago. There are people desiring for this discrimination. They look for this change, and they are apparently the ones who can dominate. It could be right, generally speaking, but from a theological point of view, it is wrong. I had highlighted this fact some minutes ago. Our religion, which put at its core the dignity of human beings, can't really proceed in this way, because the foundations of Christianity cannot be in contradiction with human rights. We can do anything, but now, in that case, we wouldn't be talking about Christians. We should also wonder, what kind of God am I believing in? Yes, you are right.
Dass auf der persönlichen Ebene Dinge
versucht. In the case of Pope Francis, who at the personal level is trying to change things, you know, appointing women as in important roles in the different dicasteries. But, you know, this takes time. We cannot solve an injustice without going to the root causes with courage. And there is a dead end, I think, or a blind spot as far as the role of women is concerned. However, you know, this discrimination cannot go on indefinitely, because if it becomes a small cult because women do not participate, and I'm hearing this, and I talk about this in my book, you know, there are women aged more than 65 years. They say, if we do not participate any longer in the church is just dead. If it became an existential issue, also the diminishment of taxes, you know, we'll see, because the church has always developed herself as an institution where, thanks to existential crisis, so the exodus of women should increase in order for the church to react, to change something. Yeah, but this existential issue, as you call it, you know, all this thinking, what you are doing, there's a lot of energy that you're investing, but why is it not enough? Why is it not enough? Why doesn't the church realizes that they are on the brink of a chaos? Well, not the theme itself, not the commitment. I'm not questioning that, but I think it is about resilience and resistance. If I think about my own order, we are forced to find second-level solutions to structural problems, because we cannot just put a plaster, you know, on a wound. And sometimes you think you can go on and resist, but then the existential crisis comes and it is a revolution, really. I'm not an expert, but I think that maybe another explanation can be found such an important player as the Catholic Church, the oldest in the world, that finds it so hard to change her structures, to change her priorities. Well, that would be my explanation. There's resistance, Ms. Klein.
I think, as a matter of fact, that the question of women for people who are in power in this global player is an existential question, because the church actually is defined by the fact of being an enemy of women, even if it is not put in these exact words. And as for the power structure, we should really see if human rights are respected or not. And this is what Professor Anna said. This has nothing to do with our faith or our beliefs or our faith principles. This is an existential factor. The fact that there are only men and only some men who have power, and this creates an existential crisis. But actually, we should probably need a second deep existential crisis to realize that we need to bring about a change. And this is really interesting, and this speaks out the truth, because it makes us perceive what we consider as Catholic. Yes, I believe that we, as a matter of fact, and as a global church, we cannot deal with everyone at the same moment. And as for the question of women, a fundamental factor for the future is the role of women. I think about my fellow sisters in India, who live in a very peculiar situation, which is totally different from ours. I also think about all the abuses being dealt with in various moments of history. And in some parts of the world, these events are not even known. And I discovered it during some events when people talked about equal rights between men and women. And there are sisters from France, from India, and they talk about patriarchy, but their points of view are totally different. We are very Western oriented with our format. But please, well, is this the current situation? This is what I said at the very beginning when we talked about Pope Francis. These are new human rights, something coming from the revolution of 1968. In some countries, there was no revolution of 1968.
Well, this is a description of reality, but in such a context, in such a circle of conversation, I've learned something by a priest. He says, we Africans are not ready, are never ready, but we're saying that the Catholic Church cannot go ahead without African people, African priests. But somebody says that we could learn to go ahead. Why does the Catholic Church is always, running after others, is lagging behind? If there are differences in the timing, what does it mean if a part of the Catholic Church, without the intelligence and the power, the scientific power and the money that they have, they can do things that are right, that are good? What does it mean for the rest of the church in the rest of the world? That will be the question. What can be done? And this would have been my last question. When do you believe the Catholic Church will be awarded a I don't know, a Nobel Prize for Peace, or, you know, something like that. Well, the Catholic Church will be awarded a Peace Nobel Prize when she will give that prize to herself.
Ich glaube, auf verschiedenen Ebenen muss man das sehen. Also
well, I wasn't looking for silence or meditation actually, but this whole topic of equal rights between men and women is so hard, and I'm sure of the fact that I won't be able to live up to see this revolution. There are so many social factors involved, and there are so many places in which so many progresses are being made. I have a lot of faith and hope, but there is still much to be done. Well, I agree, provided that, well, I agree, but up until the moment in which men will take decisions, women will not have a say. And yes, this is a contradiction, even when important people exist. For example, Sister Weyer, who will probably become the first female pope. When will it happen? Provided that she is alive, probably, but as we said at the very beginning, miracles, there is a famous song which says that miracles always exist. They can occur today or tomorrow, and maybe after the next council, regardless of when it will be held, we will be able probably to collaborate with the synod and to deal with and prepare new synodal ways, bringing about a real change, same as was the case last time. Well, this council should actually not include only bishops, but it should also welcome lay people, well-educated people representing the very variety of the church, sitting all at the very table of discussion and discussing about what we discussed about, receiving our current message that we were given by this process. Now, I actually don't remember the name. It was the World Synod. Well, can women actually vote or not? It's just a very recent development. Well, I have a very little experience, but contemporarily this can be a problem as well. We have been working in the Synod for too little a time. We are just in a first stage that was prolonged for 6 months, and we will see what kind of change will we be able to bring about. We will try to involve everyone in this process, and we will try also to ask those who collaborate to formulate proposals.
Ein kleiner Abschnitt in diesen großen Stellungnahmen, die die katholische Kirche dann in die Weltkirche einbringen soll. Also wie soll das zeitlich geschehen? Man hat schon den Eindruck, dass dieser Zeitablauf gar nicht will, dass wirklich etwas passiert. Also das ist der Verdacht, der sich da regt.
Also muss man darauf hoffen, dass Männer eines Tages beschließen, dass Frauen ein Stimmrecht bekommen bei einer Bischofssynode und dass dann
one day men should give women the right to vote. At least that is our hope. And then elect a woman pope. That is the hope. I know I'm depicting a apocalyptical scenario, but thank you for this discussion. That was really interesting, much food for thought. I thank you all. It's been a very interesting and enriching dialogue. I think that we cannot stop this kind of discussion. We all share the responsibility that human rights are not separate or detached from our Catholic DNA. So that was the last conversation in our series on gender-based violence against women in the Roman Catholic Church. And all talks were recorded and can be listened to and heard and seen in 5 languages on our YouTube channel. Our next talk will take place on December the 15th. And you see it here. To connect to what Professor Renner said, the German church in the vanguard as far as the synodal process is concerned. We see that Catholic women, report how the synodal journey was set in motion in Germany. Why was and is it necessary? What role does democracy play in this synodal journey? Are women allowed to vote? And then if it is possible for the shepherds of the church and their flocks can discuss at eye level from peer to peer on which burning issues is the process faltering, and to what extent is the German synodal journey a kind of pioneer, and could Rome, the Vatican, not learn from it? Could Rome learn from the German synodal process? And the first meeting will be on power and the separation of powers. So thank you all to our speakers. Thank you, Cristiane Florin, for moderating this conversation. Thanks to our interpreters. It is a great effort to translate simultaneously such a spontaneous conversation. So thank you all very much. Thanks to all people connected with us. I hope you will be inspired. We keep on fighting. So have a very, very nice evening. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.